Hello and welcome to Scottish Planner Live. This is the final of 10 short online sessions that we've been running all week, transforming the old Scottish RTPI annual conference. All week we've been looking at how we can plan the healthy places that we need across Scotland, and today we spend a little bit of time at the end just to reflect and hear from a range of experiences on how do we feel we need to cope with that step change then that we've been discussing all week. I'm Irene Beautyman. I'm the convener of the Scottish RTPI in 2020. My background is in the improvement service, helping local government deliver on national outcomes, and working part-time also in Public Health Scotland. So this is a topic very close to my heart. I'm looking forward to hearing what our experts on the panel today have to share and their thoughts on how we actually move forward and implement the sorts of changes that we've been raising and very much came to the fore this morning, as well as we look to how England and Wales have been progressing and how we follow on with our journey in that area. All of these sessions have been recorded, so if you are feeling that you've missed things or there's anything you'd like to pass on to others, then at the end of everything you will receive an email with a link that may not come out today. It would probably be into next week with a link to all the other sessions, and I urge you to have a look through them because there's been some fantastic little sound bites in there and some fantastic resources and publications and so on to inform all of us. As our panellists are speaking, there'll be an opportunity for you to submit questions. A Q&A panel will come up, so please do, let's have a discussion at the end. Anything that you're feeling, what about this? Doesn't have to be a question, perhaps it's just your own thoughts on the step change and how we achieve that step change. The thrust of our week has been about planners and health practitioners working more closely together. We've been stating constantly the need to work around a shared ambition. Health and its social determinants sit in where people, the conditions in which people live, work and play. We know that that is what planning is always seeking to improve those conditions. So we've been very clear on the need to work together, and we've highlighted some topics for working together: active travel, around the climate and how that knits in very much with delivering on health and well-being. And we've also talked a bit about how do we do that. Is it secondments? Is it having a cup of coffee? Is it finding topics and just getting going and doing something? And this is just a session to really focus in on that. I'll be joined by 4 guests who are going to just give a very quick sharing of their thoughts before we go into a bit more of a conversation. And that will be Kate Cowey, Service Lead for Planning in Angus Council, Dr. Husam Waer from Dundee University, Rhyss from Heriot University, and Rhiannon Moylan, who's chair of the Scottish Young Planners Network. So very much looking at a cross of thinking there, ahead of planning, academia, and then very importantly, since a lot of this is what is lying in the future for us, some young planners here reflecting on what do they see as the way ahead for us. And in many cases, I think, because Aaron certainly is in there learning about the kind of placemaking that we've been talking about all week. What are his thoughts as he moves into a career? What would he like to see happening? And for Rhiannon, it's also interesting when you're just very close to coming out of all that learning, just what is it that your expectations are for planning as we move forward. So what I'm going to do is just move straight on, and I have said to our speakers, after about 5 minutes I shall put my camera back on, and that'll be a little bit of a can we wind up in the next minute, just so that we make sure we've got plenty of time for a bit of discussion and a bit of sharing. And I do urge you just to put in your comments and your thoughts, because I'm really interested in this. This is my passion. This is an opportunity to get those thoughts and ideas for what more we could be doing, and I would certainly welcome it. And I think as we all move away from here at the end of what's been a really inspiring and filled week, it would be great to have some thoughts and actions where we go, yeah, I could do that. That's the one thing I'll take away and do. So, without any further ado, I shall introduce Kate Cowey, who is the Service Lead for Planning and Communities at Angus Council. Kate has been involved in the work that I have already been doing with public health and heads of planning, so she has that level of understanding of where we've been a little bit. But Kate, I'm interested to hear on your reflections about how do we really get the kind of step change that we've been talking about over the course of the week. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Irene. Yeah, I suppose just by way of background, in terms of my personal background, as Irene says, I work in local authorities, so I'm going to be giving the local authority view on all of these issues. My background is development plans. That's what I worked in south of the border for quite some time, and at the end of that time I was working quite closely in terms of health impact assessments and trying to integrate those with the sustainability appraisals down south, and both in terms of the plans themselves, but also in terms of the developments that were coming forward. Since moving to Scotland, I've managed planning teams, but now I head up a service that incorporates both planning and the sort of locality aspects of community planning. So I suppose maybe I have a bit of a different view on things from that point of view. When I'm thinking about a step change, I kind of get frightened by enormity of it, and I always try and break things down into baby steps. So I'm afraid I've got 3 steps towards what I think planners will need to do moving forward. The first is doing the basics. As Irene's pointed out, we're all really aware, more than ever, of the links between planning and health. Excuse me. And there are some really simple things that we can do in terms of creating plans and then implementing them that can align the two. We need to be drawing on the really rich data that is available that we don't necessarily access from NHS and our health boards. We need to be interrogating it, and we need to be using that to create plans in a real bottom-up informed way. And similarly, conversely, we need to be engaging with NHS and our local health boards about the kind of plans for growth, where we are planning houses to go, so that they can look at their infrastructure, they can plan their services. So the basics are kind of around the long-standing environmental issues we've been considering for some time, and the kind of quantitative infrastructure issues as well, you know, that kind of generic number of GPs per 1,000 population. But doing the basics well is actually quite difficult, and it can be quite a challenge. And I think part of that challenge is not saying, well, that's your problem to deal with, and kind of taking it in the round. And I'll come to that in a bit later. For me personally, I think those basics are not really enough anymore. I think we need to be developing those kind of considerations. Back at the start of the town planning movement, the health considerations were about environmental enhancement, slum clearance, pollution, sanitation. The impact of planning was massive in addressing those kind of really obvious health concerns from those environments. We're not really in that place anymore, but I think now we have that kind of more insidious, less obvious problems, things like social isolation, things like inactive lifestyles, the takeaway culture. It's now truly about health and well-being, and that's not just physical well-being, that's mental well-being too, and we have a role in all of that. So to get into those issues, I think we've got to be making that link with our community planning colleagues within our authorities, within our areas, and making sure as part of that engagement is kind of fundamental to our planning processes. We can't make assumptions about solutions in terms of places, especially in relation to delivery. And just to kind of highlight that as a bit of an example, our local authority put some solar lighting on a main path from one of its housing developments into the town centre, and that was all well and good, and we kind of ticked the box saying that's brilliant, it's active travel, it's you know, getting people into the town centre, that's great. But through conversations, through community planning, and having sort of active travel conversations with the communities, they were saying, well, that's brilliant in the summer when the sun's out, but in the winter the lights aren't on because they don't get powered up, and we don't feel safe getting into the town centres. So those issues are only kind of highlighted and can only be addressed if we're engaging with communities and having those kind of conversations. The kind of next step on from that, I think, is the kind of real game changer that we as planners have to make, and that is making the most of our role in the wider system. So kind of linking to our community planning colleagues is okay, but that's not enough. We need to look to the kind of wider system of how places work and how the people within them live. And that's not just about kind of allocating the right numbers of sites for housing, but it's about the delivery of those sites and about the functionality, how they work in that place, how they work for those people. Part of it is about making the most of getting involved with all the players in that system, in our community planning partnerships, to look at the kind of preventative approaches, especially in the kind of well-being areas, rather than just kind of addressing immediate needs. And some of that is not about having the solution, and I don't think planning has the solution to all of that, but it's about being part of the conversation, which means that you kind of take the information and you store it, and you take it back to the work you're doing, and it's there in your subconscious. And I think that's a really important part of collecting the information that we use to take planning forward. I've been part of conversations in recent weeks as part of my community planning role, about mental health and wellbeing of young adults, about men's sheds, about child protection plans. Now, not all of that is relevant to planning and spatial planning, but that information sticks, and it certainly comes back with me when I'm looking at local development plans and how we move them from being just allocations to being a useful document that we can work on delivering. So the local development plan should be the spatial expression of the local outcome improvement plan. And that's easier said than done when there's such a vast array of interests to kind of reflect. So that's the progression. I've seen Irene flash up. We do the basics. We get into engagement with communities as a way we haven't before, potentially. But more importantly, we sort of continue to live the values that we're much more than just process and regulation. We need to be aware of that wider system and be part of it. Use your elbows to get into as many conversations as you can, because it's only by doing that we get the information that we need to take back into the important work that we do as part of that system.
Thank you so much, Kate. I love that term, use your elbows. And justifying it as an approach and a technique, it makes me feel better, definitely. Thank you. As I say, we'll come back to questions and comments at the end. So I'll move on now to Dr. Husam Waer at Dundee University. Husam, I believe you have a short presentation. That's fantastic, up on the screen. So I'll pass over to you now.
You see the screen? Sorry, can you see fully the screen? Excellent.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for the invite. I really enjoyed listening to all colleagues over the last 4 or 5 days, and what I thought as an active planner, if I may say, having my professional and academic hat, I would love to share with you some thoughts and ideas as from my experience, but also as a direct reflection to what I have heard over the last 4 and 5 days, addressing hopefully what do planners need to make the steps change. And I would love to start with this quote: "A change is the only constant in life." As you can see, our life is being shaped by different changes in terms of legislations, policy, technology, personal, politics, but even lifestyle and expectations. But what the current pandemic shows, it reveals the reality of inequality in terms of health, economy, issue of climate emergency, and so on. And that leads me to the fact that this will require a different planner. A planner see the world in a really different way. And this leads me to this interesting quote. When the last 4 days, a lot of people ask for, we need to change the situation. We need to be different on even how we approach our problems, how we approach things in our society. And when we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Yes, we are, even as a professional. But change is difficult for everyone. It is difficult, and sometimes we do resist change. But the fear of change is a bigger block for us all. So I've managed to put around 6 key points together when it's come to how to tackle change. Firstly, envision a plausible future. A future, what we might call a scenario in our teaching. Yes, we need to be, as a planner, realistic, but we need to be visionary, and we need to be bold and stand as a professional to what make differences and how do we make differences. And those who can envisage a plausible future that is brighter than today will normally earn the opportunity to lead. In fact, we have many examples for that in Scotland itself. If you look at Edinburgh city centres, and in terms of how they envisage to have a better future and plausible futures, some people now taking lead on that. The second key point, we need to push the defining boundaries of that future visions as hard as you can in a really positive directions. Yes, and we have many tools, many techniques. I believe SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are opportunities, and I am so delighted SDGs now becoming part of national planning framework, and some local authorities in Scotland try to how can I say, translate them into, how can I say, achieving better futures when it's come to health, well-being, low carbon, biodiversity. But more importantly, define and describe clearly what those look like. The third one, when it's come to how to push and define boundaries, identify the actions as a series of small deliverable steps. What is important? The delivery. But we know quite well we need a small deliverable steps to do so. That take you in a really right direction incrementally. What can you do in personal, family style change, workplaces change, then community and society change? And think about it in terms of time scale. This year, the next one, and the year after. For example, starting from small things, possibly growing your own food or cycling to work or shops, and so on. So I'm highlighting the importance of starting from ourselves, from our building change in ourselves, in our family, in our colleagues, but then moving to society and so on. It's very important. Don't expect anyone to follow your policy change. So for example, not electric cars, e-bikes, walking, cycling, less meat or less waste. If you do not follow it yourself and scale it up, even your work or colleagues or even organization. The number 5 one, the change takes place one step at a time. That's quite important. Change really takes place one step at a time. So what I am trying to argue, we need to build a change in our culture, but that takes time. In some societies in Northern European countries, to change and to build that cultural change, for example, for cycling or walkability, that may take 10 to 15 years. We need to start, of course, from somewhere, but we need to be mindful of the time scale. And what is number 6 to me? Sometimes lots of people with small actions, it could really make big change. So it's not about only us, ourselves, it's about as well how do we bring other people with that in order to buy into more actions, smaller actions, but also leading hopefully to bigger change. Yes, a change is always seems impossible until it is done. That's what's important. We need to be an agent as a planner. We are an agent, and we must be an agent for change. Actually, that has to be in our work, in our community, in our life. And we need to show people through evidence why that matters in their life, day-to-day life. And the last slide, I would like to finish off with this interesting questions. Whom does the future belong to? The futures to me belong to very different kind of person with a different kind of mindset. It is those who are creators, empathizers, pattern recognizers, and meaning makers. But this may need to be being analytical, empathetic, place sensitive, creative and rational, listening, learning, and leading, but also communicator. And this will really require from us new type of dialogue, interpretation, and advocacy. We all know that our places are messy, and collaboration are messy. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Husam. Fantastic slides there, some really good ones and lovely statements in that, and a real challenge to us to lead the way, to actually walk our talk when we are creating policies and be part of the response with our own personal actions. And I always believe in that when people say about we need leaders, well, look to yourself, what are you doing to lead even within your day job and so on. Right, I'm going to pass on now to Aaron Rhys-Dodge from Heriot University. Aaron is also the student representative on the Scottish RTPI Executive Committee. So it's been a delight actually having him on the executive, letting us know what's been happening through a very unusual year for our students and for our young people, perhaps more than for the rest of us who've had the luxury really of being able to sit at home and get on with the job. So Aaron, I shall pass over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks Irene for the introduction. I suppose we've all made a bit of a step change in our own daily lives right now, I think, and for myself, having started back up year 4 at Heriot a matter of weeks ago, it's very much getting into the swing of home working. So yeah, thanks for having me along this afternoon. So I suppose the basis of my sort of 5 minutes today is really based on some of the research that's already been done and that I've taken a look at over the last week on the run up to today's event. And one of the key pieces of work that's really stuck out to me has been the RTPI's enabling healthy placemaking document policy statement, which was introduced or published rather back in June, July. And this outlines a number of various health-based approaches in relation to transportation, active travel, access to safe spaces, access to green space, and emphasises the importance of the human experience as part of healthy placemaking, and emphasising working with and engaging with the public on a daily basis to achieve our health goals, whether that be through place-based interventions, devising conceptual frameworks for planning policy, and implementing healthy placemaking principles. Another interesting piece of research that I found was the Design Council, the UK Design Council's healthy placemaking document, which was published a matter of 2 years ago, back in 2018, and that really highlights the barriers to healthy placemaking in the UK. And their top 5 barriers includes, the first one I'm sure we could all probably have guessed, is insufficient funding at a public sector level. Second of all, you've got requirements and the expectations of developers, so external factors influencing how planners take forward healthy placemaking approaches. You've also got the requirements and expectations of other professionals, perhaps architects and other people involved in the development process, which have differing, conflicting opinions as to whether or not the priority should be based on healthy placemaking or perhaps a more competitive economic development stance. Other priorities that drive projects and policies is also a heavy barrier, so perhaps focusing on something along the lines of creativity rather than health-based projects, or focusing on economic development and economic growth rather than health-based approaches. And fifth, insufficient time is also noted as being one of the main barriers to delivering healthy placemaking. So in terms of solutions and how I see the step change being taken forward, for me personally, the foundation of a shared ambition starts with a shared definition. So perhaps adopting an accepted definition of healthy placemaking nationally would be the first move, whether that be the suggested definition by Public Health Scotland, or going for something slightly different, perhaps more along the lines of what the World Health Organization advocates. But then embedding that definition in policy and in local and national policy, of course, but perhaps also in a piece of legislation. So we all know about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, which is quite a innovative piece of legislation. So perhaps if something was to rise somewhere in Scotland advocating for a healthy placemaking principle, or a universally defined definition of placemaking, healthy placemaking would be beneficial. In terms of national planning policy in Scotland and the local authority level, from what I've seen, it all tends to be moving towards notions of sustainability and health and well-being, which is all very good. It shows a good trend. We're obviously leading the way in terms of the National Place Standard, which is a very useful tool and is well adopted. Perhaps a solution would be going along the lines of creating an accreditation scheme, so similar to the Live Well scheme for healthy developments, that would be a solution and something to take forward. And then finally, perhaps adopting a universal and a more encompassing approach to health and equality impact assessments. So I think there's multiple local authorities that currently have it for major developments and developments of a certain size. So perhaps some sort of approach where health impact assessment is taken on board more often and used more often as part of our development management process. And then finally, just bringing together sort of national and international perspective, the World Health Organization, which we've all become quite familiar with over the last few months, have recommended it is important to perform health impact assessments at the planning stage to allow for the adaptation of projects at an early concept and design stage if necessary. So the World Health Organization are really promoting and advocating the importance of health impact assessments, and I definitely see that as something worth considerable value to planning in the future, and something we should definitely consider doing more often. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was fantastic references to certain reports, and it's interesting to know what people are keying out, because we've seen an awful lot of different reports, and as Michael Chang was saying, in England there's maybe been a proliferation of them because of a lack of national policy being definitive on what parts of a place actually influence health. So hopefully there's an opportunity there with, as you say, that national place standard in NPF as we move forward. Finally, I am going to pass to Rhiannon Moylan, who is the chair of Scottish Young Planners Network and also works as a planner for Montagu Evans. Rhiannon, over to you.
Thanks, Irene. It's always great to go last. I think this year in particular, health is at the forefront of everyone's mind.
Rhiannon, start your camera.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Yeah, so this year in particular, health has been a huge issue for everyone. It's at the front of everyone's minds for obvious reasons. But I think the other thing is that it's really brought communities together, and that's one of the things that, in my view, underpins health is the impact of community, and that's something that doesn't always come through enough, in my view, through planning. Often when we talk about health and well-being, we talk about infrastructure and assets, cycle lanes, how do we get people to move more, open space, and less about the people that use space and how they use them. And my view is that a lot more could be done to improve health and well-being through improving the quality of our spaces. And that's not just physical infrastructure, that's not just your cycle lanes, that's not just your open space, that's thinking about places where communities can interact, community buildings, things like in a huge block of flats, you often don't have any communal space aside maybe the entrance lobby, and it's, is there solutions through design that can improve health and well-being for people? One of the things I found really interesting when I've been looking into this is the change over the years. So when planning first came about, it was very much to tackle some of the issues of slum clearance, build new houses for people, and it very much had a social focus. Then kind of shifted to more economic, and then we started to get a bit more environmental feed in, and it's really interesting now to see that kind of turn back round to being focused more on that social issues, which is, it's what everyone's seeing at the minute, and it's how people are feeling. I think, from my views, from speaking to people, from what I've seen, there's a lot more discussion on people's own neighbourhoods, their own communities. They're not going to be commuting at the minute because obviously they can't, and there's a much more awareness of who their neighbours are. I found out my neighbour's name the other day, and that's something that I'm ashamed to say I didn't know. And the impact that can have on people's health and well-being is massive, and it's often underappreciated. So I think the core of it has to be to listen to communities, particularly where we're proposing huge amounts of large new developments. If we don't listen to the existing communities and we don't see what is and isn't there, we can't help to fill in the gaps, we can't help to make it better, and we don't always know what's missing in a place. It can be really easy as an outsider looking in to say, just like Kate said earlier, oh, we'll do this and it'll be great and we'll put the cycle paths in. But until you know how something's going to get used or how it's working, you can't get the benefit from that. So I think the step change I would say is it's mainly a culture change. We're seeing so much of this being discussed now, and it's great that the topic's coming to the forefront, but we don't want it to get lost. And I think that's why it needs to come through something like the national policy, just focusing in on health and the value that it can bring to development. I'm very aware that I wouldn't want this to be an extra level of red tape. We know how planning is often seen as a burden to development, and it just adds on more requirements and more layers. And I think the important thing is that a lot of what we're doing, we are already doing it. A lot of the whole placemaking in principle is about creating good places, but it's just drawing out that kind of finer detail on how it can impact health, and that could be done through a health impact assessment. It could just be done through developing knowledge and experience and empowering planners to be able to say, actually, this would be a better solution if we were to look at this, or have we spoken to the community? Do we know what they're thinking? So just to summarise, my step change is to make sure it stays at the forefront. We all know the impact of a huge health crisis, and we know how important health is. I mean, healthy people underpin our economy. Is that given enough weight? We really need to focus in on the importance of health. We need to make sure it comes through a national policy, and that future developments are really considering that and how they can shape people's health and well-being. And it's really just coming down to not letting it get lost and not letting it get forgotten about. We've got policies and assessments to support the economy, to support sustainability, but we don't currently have enough of a push on that health focus, and it's kind of running with what we've got just now, I think. I hope that some of you will agree with these points and see that it's already there. It's just really boosting it, I think, is what we need at this stage. Thanks.
Thanks, Rhiannon. I think your reflections on, the community cohesion that has happened over the past month for all of us is something that we don't want to lose when we come out of this. So I agree around that. We've all noticed the place outside our door and the people outside our door, and the shops and the businesses and everything that's actually been, if we have that and are lucky enough to have that within walkable access. If I can ask the others to join us on the panel, then I was going to build on something that Rhiannon mentioned there at the end about her personal intention is to make sure that it stays at the forefront of what we're doing and what we're thinking about. Now, I want to challenge each of you around that. What will you actually be doing and going away and doing differently? And that's the same for yourself, Rhiannon. You raised it, but you're not getting off the hook. What will you be going off to give, each of us something as an example of what will you be going and doing in the next week, the next month, the next year. I don't mind the time scale, that's fine. Obviously, sooner the better, but sometimes the time is right for things that will ensure that we carry on forward, not just delivering as we've all been asked to deliver on carbon emissions, but that we are thinking about health and well-being while we have that focus as well. So no pressure, Kate, but I'm going to come to you first. I'll just go in the order that everybody's spoken to give Rhiannon a little bit of time as well. So over to you, Kate, firstly.
I think probably the one thing I would do is, like I say, I'm lucky enough in managing a team and managing the community planning part of it that I get into these conversations. And like I said, I think it's really important for all planners to be part of those conversations. I'm kind of aware that they happen at a certain level at the moment. And we need to get better, certainly in my authority, but probably in others, about engagement at all levels. And I think, coming into a review of our development plan, the engagement for that has to be tied up with our community planning partners and our community planning colleagues. And we're trying to make the most of the links between the teams to make sure that we're keying in all the engagement we can into our development plan. I think there is probably a missing link in that there are some people in terms of the delivery of planning that need to get involved in those conversations more. And I suppose probably one of my things that I'll pin to the board to say that I will do is to try and get people, in all parts of the planning service involved in those conversations and involved in that. Because like I say, if it gets in your head in terms of it's an issue, it might not be that you have the solution for it, but you will at least be seeing what you do through that prism, through that thought, through those kind of filters. So I think my commitment would be to get others in the planning department as interested and as involved in those conversations as I am.
Sounds fantastic. One little question that I have is, what is the involvement within the community planning partnership? Because we were hearing from Angela Scott at the beginning of this week that she has Gail Beattie, the head of planning in Aberdeen City, sitting on the community planning partnership. And I immediately had other heads of planning getting in touch with me going, well, we're not on the community planning partnership. So I just wondered what happens within Angus.
Board, so I'm there to represent both the locality community planning, but also the planning service as well. And we have had that kind of interaction between the development plan team going and running sessions with our community planning partnership to sort of involve them in the early stages of the plan. So we are absolutely trying to create that. And I suppose that the image that we're trying to project is that, you know, the development plan isn't just the plan for the council, it is the plan for the community planning partnership, and we need to be reflecting those kind of interests. And it goes as far as, you know, the one public estate, looking at the kind of way our towns work and who has representation in those towns, and actually is that the best use of those facilities? Are they in the most accessible locations? It gets down to the nitty gritty, but I think as long as we're all part of those conversations, we're quite lucky that we've got that structure in our
we need to be listening to communities, but there are those in
nitty gritty, but I think as long as we're all part of those conversations, we're quite lucky that we've got that structure in our midst.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important because, you know, Rhiannon was saying quite rightly, we need to be listening to communities, but there are those in our communities that simply aren't bothered about coming and speaking to us. They're too busy, you know, keeping a roof over their head and food on their table. But those are the kind of topics that the community planning partnership are looking at, and looking at the priorities in their area. So if we want that insight there, then that can be a really useful avenue if you can't reach those that simply don't even know what planning is or engage with it. Husam, can I pass over to you? What are you going to change this year?
Well, okay, I want to start with myself, and then, if I may say, as an educator with my university. Something I've been working on myself, I could tell you, on my family, how to make locality is a reality. Really, a default practice in myself rather than an add-on in terms of walkability, access to shops. I'm trying to encourage myself, my family as well, using local shops, because we have ethical responsibility. But that as well lead me to issue of walking to those shops, interacting with those people, making friends, making a relationship. And I'm really very keen to engage with my local community groups, a representative, to see if we could make that 15 minutes or 20 minutes neighborhood a reality. So that's one thing for me, I feel, at personal level, but at my community level here in Dundee. Also, from next week, I am going to work with 8 third year planning students, working with Dundee City Council on how to make Dundee City a 15-minute city / 20 minutes neighborhood. Can we make that city a connected, vibrant neighborhoods? And what does that mean, and what does that entail? I know this sounds ambitious and challenging, but I have to start from somewhere.
Fantastic. We were hearing from Forbes in Glasgow earlier this week about how there's 44 town centres, and that Glasgow is a city of places, and I think that's exactly the way to be thinking about it. It isn't just your city centres. There's a changing role here for our cities, and that 20-minute neighbourhood expands to the whole of Scotland, because it isn't just about a city centre focus. Lovely. Aaron, can I pass on to you?
Yeah, thanks, Irene. I suppose from a personal perspective, lockdown has done me some good, actually, having 6 months with no academic studies or work. So reconnecting with my local community has been quite interesting, actually. Just the other day, I was looking at the step count on my iPhone, and during the months of March and April, it had been significantly higher than it had ever been in my lifetime. So yeah, you know, just day-to-day things. So, you know, walking to go and visit my granddad rather than driving down, you know, that's contributing to health and well-being, my own personal health and well-being, but also the health and well-being of others by not driving and reducing my, you know, CO2 emissions. So yeah, I would just say things like that from a personal perspective. From an academic perspective, obviously being a year 4 student, things are quite exciting for me right now. So I'm in the process of starting my dissertation. Just submitted the research proposal last week. My dissertation is on the focus of smart cities, but I'm bringing in and tying in the concepts of public engagement and public decision making, and linking in with some of these health and well-being themes. So one of the things I was looking at was Glasgow City Council Public Health Dashboard, which is obviously quite an innovative and data-driven approach to place-based change. So seeing how perhaps that kind of thing can be implemented in other local authorities in Scotland and around the world is quite interesting, quite exciting. So yeah, from that kind of perspective, yeah, things are looking quite exciting.
An awful lot more, and quite consciously for myself leaving the car behind as well, and noticing that walking experience, especially when we had very quiet roads, and now they're busier, and I'm beginning to become a crazy lady who just doesn't like the cars going fast past me and is going, slow down. I'll get a name for myself in my community. Rhiannon, I'll pass over to you.
So I probably have two. I have one that I would do in my job, my day-to-day and at work, and one for young planners and the Young Planners Network. So the first thing, I'm going to try and make more of an effort just to think about it, think about health and well-being. If a developer comes with a proposal, just to think of the ways in which health and well-being is probably being impacted by that development. I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to go suggest dramatic changes, but just in myself to be aware of it and to be thinking of it. I think that that's really important. And to be bold and to make suggestions where stuff could make a difference. And I think as well it's acknowledging where it will make a difference. Too often we're focused on just the environmental concerns, yeah, it'll impact air quality, but what will that impact be on health? And it's driving down to that. Or yeah, it'll be really good for the people who live there because it'll have a community space. But why is that so important? It's because of the impact on health and mental health. So that's kind of one thing, just drilling that out and having a bit more of an awareness in kind of what I'm doing day to day. And the other thing, I'm going to commit to arranging an event for next year, just a further CPD event for young planners on health and wellbeing and planning, just to make sure it stays on the agenda.
Fantastic, very action focused. I feel as that should only be fair. I will respond myself. So as I said, yes, I recently got a dog. I am refusing to take my dog in a car to take it somewhere to walk it, which seems to be a fairly common practice. It's like I will walk around my own area, and I will leave the car behind and have to have a reason for taking a car rather than use it as automatic. This week has really highlighted the evidence that sits, which I was aware of anyway, but the evidence that sits in NHS and in community planning that isn't feeding through and into local government and planning authorities. And Angela Scott was very vocal on that, on the need to inform an evidence-led local development plan system with the right stuff around public health. So I'll certainly be taking that back to talk to Public Health Scotland and the Improvement Service, because it seems like I sit in the two organisations that need to have a conversation around that. So I think those chats have begun, but there's that nudge forward and keep something going on that. Lovely, thank you. I'm just checking now. Kirsty had come in with some statements around the community facilities and the importance of community facilities to help with well-being as part of development planning. And I just was reflecting on, do we feel that the delivery of health, what do we think? Is it community facilities? Is it listening? What's the big kind of game changer from other people beyond planning that we would hope that others will change? If we're thinking of those that we either work with or those that we're aware of, what would we be wanting nationally or from councils or from other sectors, private sector, third sector? Is there an ask beyond the sector that we're within that we would really be looking for in order to help with that change and that game-changing kind of practice and what we're doing? I'll just keep with the order that we've been going, and it's the easiest, I think. So over to yourself, Kate.
Yeah, I think there are some changes. I think certainly in terms of developer contributions, we try to be upfront about those and have our developer contributions in supplementary guidance, and developers can come along and kind of try and hold local authorities to that. I think there is something about developers coming along and having a conversation with the members of the community about actually, I mean, we have community facilities as one of our potential developer contributions. It's not defined. It needs a conversation, it needs a negotiation on a pretty much a case-by-case basis, but those conversations are really worthwhile, and I know that we've secured some monies from developers that will contribute to a community facility to be built by the community. So those conversations are really useful, and it's helpful for developers to come into those in a more positive way, I think. Similarly, the converse side of that is we need to be working with our communities to enable them to be able to vocalise that and to be able to engage in a way that actually they can become part of that conversation. And that entirely comes back to that community planning angle of empowering communities and making sure that we are reaching not just the most vocal in communities who have been banging the same drum for the last 10 years, but also those who are sort of maybe hiding away, who we need to tease out and talk to about what they need from their local areas. So there's a bit about developers and their adaptability in terms of developer contributions and not necessarily knowing everything from the outcome, coming into it as a negotiation, but also in terms of our community development and community capacity building, I think.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'm going to pass on to Husam. A bit of learning there for you going into Dundee as well, that learning and community planning and talking to communities. But what for yourself do you feel beyond your realm you would hope that others would be doing as part of changing, having that step change?
I agree with that comments being made about the community facilities. Here in Dundee, we do have the three most deprived neighbourhoods, actually, not only in the city, in Scotland. And what I found it interesting when I study those in greater depth using my planning hat, the lack of community facilities. The lack even for a space for the community to get together, share their concerns, share their problems, and so on. And what this found, allow me to say, Irene, I don't want to debate the 20 minutes neighborhood, but what I found it interesting with this subject, 20 minutes neighborhood, we must not put all our resources in the city centre. There is tendency in the UK in general and in Scotland. If you put your resource, there is an assumption that if you put your resources in the city centre and the centre flourish, everywhere else will flourish. And I have questions about it. City must be a connected, vibrant neighbourhoods. That means, yes, the city centre has a big role to play in terms of identity, culture, visiting, students maybe, like Glasgow, like Edinburgh, like even Dundee. But we need to start investing in the how can I say, the hubs of each neighborhood, making locality a reality, and that entails facilities, services, community centers, spaces for children to react, and so on. I think we really need a new way of thinking. We need to make that a default practice. Let alone, if I may tell you, suburbia. That's, wow, a massive different subject. But I'm going to stop at this stage. Thank you.
I'm not going to argue with you talking about 20-minute neighbourhoods either, Husam. Yeah, I completely agree. And there's been a number of times this week that we've had that conversation about a changing role for cities. Is it really about getting back to some normal where everybody gets back in their whatever kind of transport to get into the city centre to work? Or is there something about actually at times just stopping that need to travel, particularly as so many of us, not all of us, will have that opportunity to work from home more in the future? Then do we even need to have that travel, and is there a new role for city centres? Aaron, can I pass to you?
You can indeed. Yes, I'd like to go back to Kate's point, perhaps touching on the community partnerships, community planning partnerships. I've had from an anecdotal point of view, quite a fortunate position to have sat on a community planning partnership. So when I was at high school, I was the young person, I suppose, on the partnership. So I would really like to see community planning partnerships taking off and really encapsulating more of the community view, bringing in more ideas and more people. I really think that they can make substantial change, and drive home local priorities and set priorities which which need to be set, I suppose. So yeah, back to the idea about in the question about community facilities and young people. So as a young person on the panel, I probably felt on the partnership. I probably felt as though I was the person that's other than the chair perhaps spoke the most at the meetings. There was always interest in what the young person had to say, which is fantastic. But I definitely see a greater role for young people on community planning partnerships. So perhaps that's an external change that needs to be looked into and brought on board, because it's definitely an aspect of society that's lacking engagement right now.
Or
that and Kikenzie Power Station, but I won't go into that one as well.
I think for me, one of the biggest frustrations I have is how often it's just the kind of usual suspects who engage with you, and you don't get the views of the whole community. And I don't really have a solution for it. But I think one of the most difficult things is when you're trying to get development to go ahead and you're just met with constant opposition. And no matter how hard you try and say, oh, well, it's going to happen, so how would you like it to be done to improve your area? So there's so much that they just have that initial panic of, no, I don't want it, it's not going to happen, that you struggle to get a dialogue and a discussion, so that you can really push development that helps communities. So I think something needs to be done about trying to take that fear away from people that it's always the big bad developer coming to do stuff to their place, when actually developers just as often want to help improve a place, because for one, it makes the development they're putting forward more attractive if it's better linked in with the community. So yeah, I think there's just, again, it's coming down to culture change. It's trying to really promote the benefits of development, and yeah, just really try and focus. I'm a very optimistic person. Focus on the good things of everything. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that comes back a bit to that community planning role, to reach those that we can't reach, but and having those conversations. But there's something in there about, that role for health impact assessments as we move forward on major developments. And when we were hearing from Margaret Douglas earlier in the week, she was looking at a process that involved communities in that process of thinking about health. But I agree, it's also back to what Husam says about change. We don't like change, so our automatic reaction is we don't want the change, and then we get to a point of accepting it and thinking, okay, actually I'll engage in what kind of change. But I do wonder at times if it's a little bit like what Kate was saying around, we need to move from just allocating sites to actually, delivering good quality places where communities can thrive, rather than there's a site is allocated, let's move on. I've got one final question, which is based on what has come up from John Walls. So it's nice to finish with a blast of a one for our final thing is, could planners do with more power and resources? Let's go. So, would you like more power and resources?
More resources, I think, definitely. But more of the right kind of resource. I think there's all sorts of things that as budgets have been cut, we're shrinking what we do, and I think maybe a bit more resource could help us expand that, certainly in terms of the engagement. I think that's really important. And coming back to Aaron's point earlier about engaging with young people on a community planning partnership, lots of young people wouldn't be comfortable in that, so we need to be going to young people in the places that they are comfortable in engaging, and that does take time and resource. Power, I'm not so sure of. I think we have power. I don't think we necessarily use it. And in some aspects, I think people think we have more power than we do, if that makes sense. They think that we're all encompassing. We can just say no to development, and that's fine. I think the power that we have is that coordination role. We are generally masters of all trades. We understand a lot of what's going on as planners, and our power is in coordinating that and making sense of that kind of real mess of interests. And we're actually really good at that. So I think we do have power. I think I would be scared to have any more. I think we need other people's interests to kind of balance everything going on in our world, but we're one of many players rather than the main one.
Data though, and if it gets to an inquiry,
everything going on in our world, but we're one of many players rather than the main one.
Is there something around what Angela Scott said about the need to have our decisions validated though, and if it gets to an inquiry, where we don't always get that decision validated, and if it's about delivering healthy places, do we just need a bit more, what I keep referring to as teeth, to allow us to confidently apply our policies?
Needed in terms of understanding of the value of design. I think there are very few decisions that are made purely on the basis of design, and design can be really important in terms of healthy places. and I think probably there is a reticence to refuse an application for a significant amount of houses, for example, because they don't have a linkage, or walking links or cycling links, or it's development and it's seen as good. And I think possibly if that's where we're going to get more teeth, that would be good, but that involves a greater understanding of those design areas. But I think that's probably the one area where I would suggest we need a bit more assertion.
Lovely, thank you. Husam, over to you.
The way I see power, if I may say, although I think I am like Katie, I feel nervous about this phrase for whatever reason. It reminds me with top down or so, but power to me, yes, we do need a specific type of power where it helps us to stand for our position as a professional, stand for place equality, whether we are work for local authority or university or private sectors. We need to have this power to say no for bad design, no for, how can I say, just site allocation, and yes for placemaking, yes for healthy placemaking. We need really to reach to this kind of power, even if it is for our client, even if it is for our manager. I would love to reach that level to say, look, I am standing against this decision because this decision is bad for the country, bad for the community, bad for our community, bad for our health. I would love to reach that. So that's kind of power. But also, when it's come to power as well, I would love to reach to a stage where we are, rather than a planner, we are a mediator. I always, how can I say, when I teach my students, tell them, look, you are a mediator and a facilitator. You are the mediator of power between those who are in decision makers upstairs, the top down, but also you are the mediator between the bottom up and the top down. So we are the middle in and the middle out. I would love to see we've got that kind of power, but also I like these resources. We need, if I may say, as a planner, we need to pay more attention not only into the technical skills, but also the soft skills, societal skills. What does that mean to be empathizers? How to make that a reality? So those two things between being professional, but also being empathizers, and this is require kind of really more empowerment into soft skills. Thank you.
Aaron, can I pass to you?
Yeah, I quite like what Husam was saying there. So obviously it's the RTPI's mission statement, planners are the mediators of space, yet we also make places. But I'd rather like to focus the power dynamic more on the community, ensuring that the community are the makers of place, whilst we retain our role as the mediators of space. I quite like that, I've always sort of stuck by the mantra of planning with people at the forefront of decision making, and that phrase has just always stuck in my head. And I really, really like it. I think it encapsulates everything that we should be trying to do as planners. We should be encouraging the people in the communities in the local areas to make the big decisions and allowing it to happen and take its course.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of what everyone's said so far. It's not so much about power and what power we have. It's how do you empower planners to use that, to go beyond just maybe, oh, it doesn't quite match this policy, or well, it's probably going to be okay because generally it's good. It's actually getting down to it and having the confidence to make those planning-based decisions. So much of planning is a balance, and it's finding that balance and having the confidence within planners for them to come out and say, actually, this is what I think and this is why I think it. And it does accord with the majority of policies, maybe not quite that one, but it's going to have benefits. So I think that that's what it comes through is to give planners that voice and that confidence and that recognition, rather than sometimes there's a fear of a committee will just say that, or this won't happen, or I think it's just giving planners a much stronger voice.
What a fantastic point to end a week and 10 sessions and over 500 people listening in. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions there and your reflections, and that we are not at all power mad, it would appear. We're very clear that we are mediators and facilitators of that space, but we could perhaps do it with a little bit more confidence. And I think the week that we've just had, I very much hope that what it has done is given those that have listened in that little bit more confidence when it comes to making those daily choices and those daily decisions in work, and in our personal lives as well, about healthier choices for everybody and helping Scotland reduce the huge inequalities that we're all aware of. I thank everybody who's listened in as well, and thank you very much to Craig and Annette, who've been in the background sorting all of this while I've just been easily rocking up and talking, which is what I'm good at. And thank you to Adam, who's been in the background running everything for us and it all going so smoothly with what has been a very different annual conference. I've welcomed it because we've managed to have speakers from a wide geography of areas, and we've actually had attendees from a wide geography of areas as well. And I think that's possibly part of where we move on into the future, is being able to do that across Scotland and have these conversations far more broadly than them perhaps being focused too much in the central belt. I shall close now. What I will miss is that normally you would now be going off to the pub for the glass of wine, and we won't manage that, but hey ho, it's Friday evening, so I hope you all enjoy that glass of wine wherever you're having it, and go safe. Thank you everybody who's taken part this week. Bye bye.